The south wind had not stopped blowing for 3 months. It was a mean, gritty wind. Born in the flat hell of the Llano Estacado and sent north into Kansas to scour the land clean. It carried the taste of red dust, so fine it settled in the creases of your eyes and coated your tongue. In the Cimarron Valley, the year was 1878, and the drought had drawn the color from the sky, leaving a pale, aching heat. The Red Bluff station smelled of rust, axle grease, and coffee that had been boiling on the stove for 6 hours. Eleanor Hart, Nell to everyone who did not owe her money, ran the kitchen and the storeroom. She was a widow, a title she wore like a plain wool shawl, neither flaunting it nor hiding from its simple, heavy truth. She moved with a quick, economical grace, counting flour sacks and measuring beans as if her movements were the only thing holding the world in place. Her hands were strong, scarred from lye soap and hot iron, but they were steady. They knew how to handle a rolling pin, a needle, and the Winchester rifle leaning just inside her office door. She was a good shot, a skill her father had insisted upon, but the rifle gathered its own coat of fine red dust. She had seen what violence did, and she wanted no more of it. Her life was measured in the arrival and departure of the stagecoach. The rumble of its wheels was the punctuation of her days, bringing sweating horses, weary passengers, and the all-important mail sack that might one day hold a letter telling her the price on the river land had dropped. That land was her goal, a small patch on the Dry Fork, worthless to most, but it had belonged to her family before the war, and bad debts had washed it away. It was, she felt, the only piece of her past that was not buried in the graveyard with her husband. She saved every spare nickel, every quarter, aiming for the day she could walk onto that land and call it home. Outside the station, the town of Red Bluff shimmered in the heat. It was a place of sharp edges and thin patience. Settlers, starved out and desperate for water, eyed the Comanche who moved along the ridges. The Comanche, led by small bands that refused the reservations, watched the iron rails of the railroad creeping west like a steel snake. And watching everyone was Ezekiel Brandt. Brandt's name was spoken in whispers, like a prayer to a dark god. He was Brandt and Company, the man building the canals, the man bringing the railroad, the man who believed water flowed toward money. He owned the newspaper, the bank, and, most folks figured, the county courthouse. His law was enforced by Deputy Duke Mallory, a man who wore his badge as a license. Mallory was broad, loud, and had a habit of resting his hand on his pistol butt when asking questions. He was Brandt's shadow, and he cast a long one in the unforgiving sun. Tahan watched the station from a rise 2 miles distant. He was Comanche, not a reservation Indian, but a man of the Nayuom, the people. His band lived as they always had, following the last thin herds of buffalo, honoring the old ways. He sat his pony with a stillness that was part of the landscape. He was a warrior, his body lean and disciplined, his eyes holding the flat, patient gaze of the hawk. He wore buckskin and carried a rifle, but his honor was his own, not something given or taken by the white man's law. Sometimes, for a price, he scouted for wagon trains, his sharp eyes reading the land in a way the emigrants could not. He guided them to water, kept them from blind canyons, and saw them safely through. Then he would melt back into the plains, his agreement fulfilled. He did not trust the town, its bitter coffee, or its paper laws. He watched the stagecoach station now, noting the weary horses, the plume of red dust that followed a lone rider. He watched the woman, Nell, move from the storeroom to the kitchen. He had seen her before, riding out alone, checking her fences. She rode well, straight-backed, and she did not seem afraid of the land. He respected that. He did not know her, but he knew her kind bound to one small patch of ground, blind to the great sky above it. That evening, the stage pulled out, leaving a silence that was heavier than the heat. Nell finished scrubbing the long dining table, the lye soap stinging the small cuts on her knuckles. The day's earnings were $8.50, a pitiful sum. At this rate, the riverland would remain a dream. She was tired, a deep bone weariness that the heat and the dust made worse. She locked the storeroom, checked the water barrel, and carried the small lantern to her room at the back of the station. It was little more than a cell, but it was hers. A narrow bed, a washstand, and a single wooden trunk at the foot of the bed. It had been her husband's. She had not opened it in more than a year. Not since the day he was brought home, shot from his horse in a dispute over a dry creek bed. Another casualty of the thirsting land. Tonight, she did not know why, she needed to... The hinges complained, filling the small room with a sound like a rusty sigh. The smell of cedar and old wool rose up. There was not much, a suit, now hopelessly out of style, a pair of worn boots, a shaving kit, a leather-bound ledger she had already looked through, finding nothing but debts. But beneath the ledger, wrapped in oilcloth, was a stack of papers. Her heart did not leap, it simply tightened. More debts. Likely more proof of her husband's failed dreams. She pulled the packet out and set it on the bed, the oilcloth stiff and cracking. She unwrapped it. Most of it was what she expected. Bills of sale for horses that had gone lame, a receipt for 1,000 pounds of seed that never saw rain. And then, at the bottom, a single folded document. It was a copy, written in a clear, legal hand, but it was the heading that made her stop breathing. Deed of water right, Dry Fork River, Section 14. She read it once, her mind refusing the words. She read it again, her fingers tracing the legal description of the land, her land, the land she was saving to buy. But this was not a deed for the land. This was a deed for the water. It was an old claim, filed 30 years before, by her grandfather. A claim that predated the railroad, predated Brent, predated the state line itself. A claim. She realized with a sudden, cold clarity that her husband must have found, and a claim he had likely died for. This paper, this copy of a forgotten promise, was the only thing that stood between Ezekiel Brant and his absolute control of the Dry Fork. If he built his dam, her land, and all the small farms downstream would turn to dust. The south wind rattled the window frame, throwing grit against the glass. Nell Hart sat on the edge of her narrow bed, the papers shaking in her hand. The smell of burnt coffee was long gone, replaced by the cold, metallic scent of fear and a new, sharp tang of purpose. She was a widow who ran a kitchen. She avoided violence. She wanted only a small patch of earth to call her own. But the paper in her hand was not about land. It was about water. And in the West, water was not memory. It was life. And she realized, holding the one thing that could stop a war, or start a new one. 2 days later, Nell was driving the freight wagon herself. She had loaded it before dawn. The weight of the flour sacks and coffee bins a familiar, comforting ache in her shoulders. The wagon was heavy, its wheels groaning in the dry ruts of the main road. She had argued against taking the water deed copy, but her own mind had turned on her. Leaving it at the station seemed as dangerous as carrying it. What if Mallory, Brant's man, decided to search the station while she was gone? He had no legal right, but the law in Red Bluff was a thin, brittle thing. So the leather satchel was on the floorboards at her feet. It held her ledger, the station accounts, and tucked inside the ledger, the oilcloth packet containing her husband's papers, the map, and the copy of the water deed. She was on her way to the county seat, a full day's ride, hoping a judge in a slightly larger town might be slightly less impressed by Ezekiel Brant's money. She hated this. She hated the fear that tasted like old pennies in her mouth. She wanted to be in her kitchen, her hands white with dough, arguing with the stagecoach driver over the price of jerky. She did not want to be a guardian of paper. She reached Devil's Cut by 9 in the morning. The air was already hot, the sun a white glare. The cut was a narrow passage between two red rock mesas, a place where the wind always moaned and shadows lay long. Even at midday, it was a perfect place for an ambush. The thought had barely formed when the first rifle shot cracked the air. The sound was sharp, definitive. A bullet screamed off the rock face high to her right, spraying stone chips. Nell did not scream. She hauled back on the reins with all her strength, her voice a low, urgent command to the horse team. "Whoa, whoa, boys!" The horses panicked, rearing in their traces, fighting the bit. The heavy wagon slewed sideways, one wheel threatening to drop into a deep rut. "Easy, damn you," she hissed, her knuckles white. A second shot, lower this time, kicked up a plume of dust 10 feet in front of the lead horse. A warning. They did not want her dead. Not yet, they just wanted her stopped. 3 men rode out from a cluster of pinon pine, their faces covered with dusty blue bandanas. They were not Indians. They were white men, dressed in worn jeans and flannel. And they sat their horses with the lazy confidence of men who were paid to be cruel. "Just hold up there, Ms. Hart," the lead rider called. His voice was muffled, but the Ms. Hart hit her like a slap. They knew exactly who she was. "What do you want?" Nell's voice was tight, but it did not shake. She kept her hands on the reins, high and visible. Her Winchester was in its scabbard on the wagon, but it was a fool's reach away. "We just want the papers, ma'am," the man said. He sounded almost polite, which made it worse. "The ones you found in your husband's trunk, Brandt and Company. They do not like folks holding onto old claims." He had unslung his rifle and was cradling it across his lap. His 2 companions fanned out, one moving to block the path ahead, the other circling behind her wagon. She was boxed in. "I do not know what you are talking about," she said, the lie tasting sour. "Do not play dumb." The man's politeness vanished. "It will not end well for you. The satchel, just throw it down. We will even let you keep the flower." Nell's mind raced. The deed was everything, but her life, her husband had died for this. Was she supposed to? She looked at the men, at their hard eyes above the bandanas. Yes, they would kill her. They would shoot her, tip the wagon into the gully, and call it a tragic accident. She stared at the leader for a long, quiet moment. The wind whistled through the canyon, the only sound besides the nervous stamp of the horses. "All right," she said, her voice hollow. She bent down, her heart a cold stone in her chest, and her fingers closed around the leather strap of the satchel. She hated the weakness, the giving in, but she was one woman, and they were 3 guns. She straightened, holding the bag. "Toss it," the man commanded. She threw it. It landed in the red dust between them, puffing up a small cloud. The man behind her dismounted, keeping his rifle trained on her, and walked slowly to the bag. He picked it up, checked inside, and then nodded to his boss. "It is all here, the ledger and some old papers." "Good," the leader smiled, a stretching of fabric over his mouth. "You have a nice day, Ms. Hart, and you forget you ever saw this paper." He raised his hand, a signal. The man behind her raised his rifle, no longer aiming at her, but at the head of her lead horse. A new kind of cold, a sharp, metallic rage, flooded her. "No," she whispered. They were not just robbing her. They were going to strand her. They were going to kill her team. But the shot never came. Instead, a different sound, a low, rolling thunder that was not thunder. It was the sound of hooves, dozens of them, hundreds. A cloud of dust, far larger than any wagon could make, erupted from a dry wash to the south. It was a stampede, a wave of horseflesh, mustangs by the look of them, running wild and terrified, driven hard. The 3 ambushers whirled, their attention torn from Nell. "What in hell?" the leader started to say. And then, from the ridge above them, a new sound, a high, thin cry that cut through the wind. It was not a white man's yell. 3 riders appeared, outlined against the pale sky. They were Comanche. Nell knew who the leader was. She had seen him from a distance, watching the station. Tahan. He and his 2 companions were not charging. They were not firing. They had driven the mustangs, and now they sat, watching the chaos they had created. The dust cloud hit the canyon cut like a solid, choking wave. The world vanished. Nell was blind, coughing, the air thick with grit and the smell of panicked horses. Her own team screamed, pulling against the wagon brake. The masked men were shouting, cursing, lost in the red fog. Then, a single shot, not a warning. It was precise, purposeful. It was followed by the sharp crack and splinter of wood. The dust began to settle. Nell wiped her eyes, her skin caked in mud. The mustangs were gone, vanished up the canyon. The 3 ambushers were in disarray. One of their horses was limping. The man who had taken her satchel was standing beside a small supply wagon they must have hidden in the pines. One of its wheels shattered. The spokes splayed out like broken ribs. The leader stared up at the ridge, but the Comanche were gone. They had vanished as silently as they had appeared. He looked at Nell, his eyes burning with a frustrated hatred. He looked at his broken wagon. Their only way to haul the stolen goods quickly. He and his men were now the ones who were stranded. He spat in the dust. "Get the horses. We are riding. Leave the damn wagon." He pointed at Nell. "We will be back for you." They mounted, the man with the satchel tying it hastily to his saddle horn. They galloped away, back toward Red Bluff, leaving Nell alone in the sudden, ringing silence. She sat for a full minute, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the reins. She was alive. Her horses were alive. But the deed was gone. She finally let out the breath she had been holding. It came out as a sob, dry and ragged. She had failed. She was about to reach for the brake when a shadow fell over her. She looked up, her hand dropping to the butt of the Winchester, her heart leaping back into her throat. Tahan was there. He was not on the ridge. He was beside her wagon, mounted on his pony, as if he had risen from the red earth itself. His 2 riders were nowhere to be seen. He was silent, watching her. His face was a mask of hard plains and shadows, his black hair long and unadorned. He wore no paint, but he was a warrior, and she felt the truth of it in her bones. She stared at him, unable to speak. He was the man the town called a savage, a ghost of the plains. He had just saved her. He held out his hand. In his palm was a single piece of paper, folded and stained with dust. She looked at it, confused. They took the satchel." "They took paper," Tahan said. His voice was low, and his English was clear, marked only by the flat, careful rhythm of a language learned but not loved. "This fell." She reached out and took it. Her fingers brushed his skin warm and dry. It was not the deed. It was not the ledger. It was the other paper, the strange, hand-drawn map. She looked at it, her mind slow to catch up. She had barely glanced at it before. It was just lines, circles, and in the corner, a small, intricate symbol etched in the faded ink. She fumbled at her neck, her fingers pulling at the thin leather cord she always wore. She pulled her mother's locket from beneath her cotton shirt. It was silver, tarnished, and heavy. She clicked it open. Inside, pressed into the metal, was the same design, a series of nested circles, like a spring bubbling up, with a single, sharp line cutting through it. She had looked at it 1,000 times as a child, thinking it just a pretty pattern. She held the locket out, open. Next to the map, the symbols were identical. "My mother," she whispered, looking up at him. "This was my mother's. Her people were Comanche." Tahan's gaze sharpened. He looked from the locket to the map, and his expression, which had been so still, shifted. He was no longer looking at her. He was seeing her. He pointed a long finger at the symbol on the map. "The people know this sign," he said. "It is old, older than the people. It is Katipoa-Tivoo, the breath of the earth, where the land drinks the sky." He looked at her, his eyes holding hers, and the distance between them collapsed. He was not a stranger. He was, she realized with a jolt, the only person on this entire, God-forsaken plain who might understand. "Brant's men stole the copy of the water deed," she said, her voice finding its strength. "They think they have won. They are going to build a dam on the dry fork." Tahan's gaze did not waver. He nodded, once, as if she were confirming something he already knew. "They stole the white man's paper," he said, tapping the map she held. "They left the water. What does it mean?" she asked, her hand closing over the map, over the locket. "It means," he said, "the land is not dead, it is waiting, and the old ones left away." He looked back toward Red Bluff, his face hardening. "Brant's dam will choke the earth. He wants to own the river." "He will," Nell said, the despair returning. "He has the paper." "He has a paper," Tahan corrected. "You have the map." An alliance was not formed. A word was not spoken. But a bargain was struck in the silent, dusty air of Devil's Cut. He needed to know what her locket meant. She needed to know what his map promised. He gathered his reins. "They will come back. Not today, but they will come." "I know," she said. "This map," he said, "is a dangerous thing to have." "So was the paper they stole," Nell replied, meeting his gaze. A small, almost imperceptible softening happened at the corners of his eyes. It was not a smile. It was respect. He nodded, a sharp, final gesture. He turned his pony, and without a sound, urged it back toward the rocks. He did not gallop. He simply moved, and the landscape seemed to accept him back, swallowing him into the heat and the stone. Nell Hart sat alone in her wagon, the shattered wheel of her enemies a strange monument in the dust. She had lost her proof of ownership, but she held a map to the water itself, and for the first time, she was not entirely alone. Nell rode back to Red Bluff with the map tucked inside her boot and her mother's locket hanging cold against her skin. The wagon wheels rumbled over the hardpack, a hollow sound. She felt stripped, exposed. She had lost the legal paper, the one thing she thought was her weapon. Now she was left with a symbol, a story from the earth. It felt like a poor trade. The town was simmering when she arrived. The air, already thick with heat, was now poisoned with rumor. She saw it in the way men stopped talking when she pulled the wagon past the saloon, the way they looked at her, then looked away. Tahan watched from the hills. He had circled wide, keeping to the ridges, and had seen the three ambushers ride hard into town, their faces still caked with the dust he had provided. He had watched them go straight to the deputy's office. He did not need to speak the white man's language to read that story. It was a story of badges and thieves working from the same script. By noon, the Red Bluff Advertiser was on the street. Nell saw the printer's boy tacking a fresh sheet to the front of the general store. The headline was thick and black. "Savage Raid on Dry Fork Trail." She stopped, her hands still on the reins, and read the words. "A cowardly attack by reservation renegades." It spoke of a brave freighter. She assumed that was her who was set upon by a band of Comanche. It mentioned, in vivid, lying detail, the war cries and painted faces. Then it praised the timely intervention of county authorities, who were investigating a separate matter nearby and drove the savages back to their hills. It was a masterpiece of fiction. It twisted Tahan's rescue into an attack and painted Mallory's thieves as heroes. The story concluded by noting that Ezekiel Brant had personally offered a reward for the capture of the renegades, stating that progress cannot be halted by the violent acts of a dying people. Nell felt sick. The lie was so complete, so suffocating. It stole the air from her lungs. Brant had not just taken her deed, he was taking the truth, too. She unhitched her team, her movements stiff. She heard the clang of a hammer on anvil and walked, almost against her will, toward the sound. The smithy was a dark mouth-breathing smoke and fire. Isaiah Cole worked in the center of it, a mountain of a man in a leather apron. The muscles in his arms moved with a rhythm that was as steady as the sunrise. He was a black man, and in Red Bluff. That meant he, like the Comanche, lived on an island, separate from the town's white chatter. He was respected for his work, but he was never truly part of it. He saw her and nodded, not breaking his rhythm. Hammer, anvil, hiss. "Ms. Hart," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You are back." "They say I was attacked by savages," Nell said, her voice flat. Isaiah gripped the hot iron with his tongs and plunged it into the slack tub. The water exploded in steam. He turned, wiping his hands on a rag. His eyes were clear and tired. "The advertiser is a $2 pistol," he said. "It makes a lot of noise, but Mr. Brant points it where he pleases. You are not hurt." It was a statement, not a question. He had looked her over with a practiced eye. "No, I am not hurt." "But they got what they came for." Nell stiffened. "How did you—" "Mallory and his boys were in the saloon by 10 o'clock, Isaiah said, buying drinks with Brant's money. They were celebrating a job well done. They are not smart men. Ms. Hart, they are just loud." "They took the copy of the deed," she whispered. Isaiah looked away, toward the fire. "Then that is that, your husband. He died for that piece of paper. Maybe it is better it is gone. It is a cursed thing." "No," Nell said, the words sharper than she intended. "It is not over." "What is left?" he asked. "You cannot fight Brant. He owns the water by owning the bank. He owns the law by owning the badge. And now he owns the story by owning the newspaper." "He does not own the land," she said. "Not yet." Before Isaiah could answer, a woman's voice cut through the heat. "She is right, Isaiah. Stop trying to scare her. She is already scared. So am I." May Collins stepped out of the shadows of the smithy. She owned the apothecary next door, a small shop that smelled of herbs, chemicals, and clean linen. She was a small, plain woman, with sharp eyes behind steel spectacles. She was the only person in town who could, and would, tell Ezekiel Brant he was full of hot air. "May," Nell said, relieved. "I saw the paper," May said, holding up a bottle of dark liquid. "I was bringing Isaiah his laudanum, for his back, and I am bringing you a dose of reality. You have stirred the hornet's nest. Nell, what happened out there?" Nell told them. She told them about the ambush, the men in bandanas, the voice that knew her name, and then, her voice dropping, she told them about the dust cloud, the Mustangs, and the 3 Comanche riders on the ridge. "Tahan," Isaiah said, his voice holding a new respect, "the one they call the ghost." He helped me," Nell said, the words feeling strange. "The men who attacked me, their wagon wheel was broken. Tahan's men did it. Then he gave me something." She could not bring herself to mention the map. Not yet. "He helped you," May said, "and the newspaper calls him a criminal. That is Brant's world." "What do I do, May?" Nell asked. "They have the deed. They will go to the judge." "They will not bother with a judge," May said, her voice grim. "They will go to the land." As if summoned by the words, a shadow fell across the wide door of the smithy. "Afternoon, folks." Deputy Duke Mallory filled the doorway. He was smiling, a wide, confident smile that did not touch his cold eyes. He took off his hat and wiped his sweatband, his gaze landing on Nell. "Ms. Hart, thank goodness you are safe. I was just about to ride out, put together a posse. We will catch those red devils for you." "Will you?" Nell said. It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Brant himself is deeply concerned. We cannot have our citizens terrorized." I was not terrorized by the Comanche. Deputy, Mallory's smile tightened. The sun can play tricks on a person. Ma'am, confuse things. Now, I just need to ask a few questions for my report. He turned his gaze on Isaiah. You can go back to your hammer. Cole. He walked toward Nell, invading her space. It is a terrible thing. Losing your property. Those men in Devil's Cut, the renegades. I mean, they take anything valuable. They took a leather satchel, Nell said, her voice like ice. Is that so? Well, we will get it back. Now, about these papers your husband left, Mr. Brandt, he is a thorough man. He wants to make sure, with the deed copy gone, that there are not any other copies, or originals, or maps. The word hit her. Maps. I am a widow who runs a stagecoach stop. Deputy, Nell said, meeting his gaze. I cook, I clean, and I count beans. I do not deal in maps. You are sure about that? He stepped closer. Because it would be a shame if I had to search the station. A real shame. I am not a delicate man. I tend to break things. The copy they stole was the only one I had, Nell said. She was using the truth as a shield. My husband's trunk is full of receipts for cattle he never bought and seed he never planted. It is a trunk full of ghosts. Deputy, there is nothing in it for you, or for Mr. Brandt. Mallory searched her face. He was a bully, but he was also a dog that knew his master's scent. He could smell no fear, only a cold, hard anger, and he could not find the lie. He finally grunted, satisfied. Well, that is good to hear. It means you have got no more stake in the dry fork. You are just a good citizen, doing her job. He turned to leave, then paused in the doorway, the sun at his back. Just remember that, Ms. Hart. You cook, you clean, you stay out of men's business. We would all hate for you to end up like your husband. He put his hat on and was gone, leaving a silence that was louder than the forge. Nell was shaking, a deep, bone-trembling rage. May Collins put a small, firm hand on her arm. That is the law in Red Bluff. May whispered. That is not law, Isaiah said, his voice thick with disgust. That is just a leash, and Brandt holds the end of it. Nell looked at her two friends. They were risking something, just by standing with her. Tehan was on the ridge when Mallory left the smithy. He had seen the deputy go in, had seen him try to crowd the woman. He had seen her stand her ground. He had also seen her shaking when the man left. He felt the pull, the urge to ride away, to take his men and follow the wind. This was their world. This poison, this paper law that was just a club. His freedom was in the saddle, in the silence of the high plains. To stay was to be dragged into this mud, this world of words that meant their opposite. But he thought of the map, Katipoa Tivoo, the breath of the earth. He had watched his mother and his young brother die of the coughing sickness the white man had brought with the reservation rations. He had sworn then to never be penned, to never trust their paper or their promises. But Brandt was not just using paper. He was planning to kill the water. He was planning to choke the breath of the earth. That was not a white man's fight or a Comanche fight. That was a fight for the land itself. His honor, the discipline that ruled him, demanded he stay. He could not leave the land to be murdered by such men. That night, Isaiah came to the back door of the station. He carried a small, greasy sack. May was with him. You cannot stay here, Isaiah said, his voice urgent. Not after what Mallory said. This is my station, Nell said. I am not running. We are not asking you to run, May said. She looked exhausted. We are asking you to fight, but we have to be quick. Isaiah opened the sack and dropped a single, metal object on the kitchen table. It was a blasting cap. What? Nell started. A freight wagon came in on the 5 o'clock, Isaiah said. It was not a regular delivery. It was guarded, loaded with 20 barrels of dynamite, and 100 of these. They are taking it to the Dry Fork Narrows tonight." "They are not waiting," May said, her voice thin. "They are going to blast. They are going to divert the river. The notice to clear obstructions was posted an hour ago. It gives the public 10 days to file a complaint." 10 days, Nell said, the words a death sentence. "By the time a complaint is read, the Dry Fork will be flowing into Brant's main canal." May finished. "He will have already won." Nell looked at the cap, then at May, then at Isaiah. They were the only two people in town who had dared to stand with her. She walked to her small room and came back. She unfolded the map on the table, next to the blasting cap. "He has his dynamite," Nell Hart said, her voice steady. "But we have this. He thinks he can beat the law. Let's see if he can beat the land." They left the station 2 hours before dawn, 4 shadows moving against a field of stars. Tahan led, setting a pace that was just short of punishing. He did not lead them on the main roads. He moved through a landscape Nell had lived beside for years but had never truly seen. He followed dry washes, cut through arroyos, and used the low, rolling hills as a shield against any watching eyes from town. Isaiah was on a mule, his face set in a stubborn mask. His world was the forge, the steady heat and the known quantities of iron and coal. This wild, open dark, with its shifting gravel and the hoot of an owl, was a foreign country to him. He was a man of immense physical strength, but he was breathing hard, his trust placed entirely, and uncomfortably, in the Comanche warrior. May Collins was tougher. She rode her mare with a grim competence, her apothecary bag tied securely to the saddle. She was a woman who dealt in facts in compounds, in dosages, in the precise measurement of hope and poison. The land was just a larger, more chaotic laboratory, and she was observing it, taking its measure. Nell rode beside Tahan when the land allowed it. She was comfortable in the saddle, her body remembering the long rides with her father. But this was different. This was not a ride, it was an infiltration. Tahan moved with a silence that unnerved her. He seemed to read the ground with his body, his horse's hooves finding solid rock where she saw only loose scree. He had not looked at her, not really. Since they left, he was a tool sharpened for this one purpose, to guide them to Mesa Chaco, to the place the map had promised. They rode for 6 hours, the sun rising like a judgment, instantly hot, instantly hostile. It found them in a stretch of open plain, a flat, shimmering emptiness that offered no shade and no concealment. "We have to cross this," Tahan said, stopping his pony. "We will be seen." "By who?" Isaiah asked, squinting into the glare. "There is nothing here." "There is always someone," Tahan said. He did not wait for an answer. He urged his pony forward. They crossed the plain, a slow, agonizing crawl under the eye of the sun. The silence was broken only by the plodding of hooves and the creak of Isaiah's saddle. The sandstorm hit them with the sudden, senseless violence of a fist. One moment, the sky was a pale, aching white. The next, the horizon vanished, erased by a wall of churning red dust. The wind screamed, a physical weight that shoved them from their saddles. "Down!" Tahan's voice was a flat command, barely heard over the roar. "Cover the horses!" Isaiah's mule brayed in terror. Spinning, May was nearly thrown. But Nell reacted without thinking. She was off her horse, her body low, her hands grabbing the bridle. She pulled her neckerchief up over her nose and mouth. Her eyes slitted, and spoke in a low, steady voice to her horse, calming him. She pulled him toward the others, her back to the wind, using her own body as a small, insufficient shield. Tahan was already working, yanking the bedrolls from their saddles. He threw one to Isaiah, pointed at the mule's head. "Cover him, or he will bolt." He turned to Nell and stopped. She was already there, her horse steady, her head bowed. She was not a cowering woman. She was an animal, like her horse, enduring the storm, conserving her strength. She knew how to survive. He looked at her for a long second. the grit stinging his own face. He saw her practicality, her lack of panic. She was not a town woman. She was a woman of the plains, buried under a thin layer of flour and ledgers. He felt that same strange jolt he had felt in Devil's Cut the Sharp, unwelcome pull of respect. "To the rocks!" he yelled, pointing toward a low, dark shape barely visible in the red haze. "We cannot stay here." They fought their way to the outcrop, a journey of 100 yards that felt like a mile. The rocks offered a meager lee. They huddled behind a small dune of boulders. The horses pressed together, their tails to the wind. The storm howled around them for 2 hours. It was a suffocating, blinding, timeless hell. When it passed as it had come, with a sudden, eerie speed. The wind died. The dust settled, leaving the world coated in a soft, red powder. Everything was muffled. "Well," May said, her voice hoarse. She spat a mouthful of mud. "If Brant wanted to follow us, I believe he has lost the trail." Isaiah was slumped, his shoulders bowed. The storm had taken more from him than just energy. "We should not have come," he said, his voice low. "This is not our fight. This is not a place for men." "It is the only place," Tahan said. He was already checking his pony's hooves. "The land fights for itself. We are just listening." He looked at Nell. "You did well," he said. Nell just nodded, her face caked with red grime, her eyes burning. "I have tasted dust before. Tahan." They reached the base of Mesa Chaco as the sun was setting. It was a sheer cliff of sandstone, rising 500 feet from the plain. "The map is up there," Tahan said. "We climb now." The climb was worse than the storm. They left the horses carrying only water, the map, and May's bag. The trail was a narrow goat path, winding and treacherous. Isaiah, for all his strength, struggled. His size was a liability here, but it was Nell who helped him, not with strength, but with sense. "Use your hands." "Isaiah," she said, her voice calm in the growing dark. "Test the rock. 3 points of contact, just like your forge. Solid, solid, solid." They reached the top at midnight, collapsing onto the flat, moon-washed stone. The night was cold. The heat of the day had been sucked from the land, leaving a deep, penetrating chill. They huddled together, sharing a single blanket, and slept in fits. At dawn, Tahan was already up, standing at the edge of the mesa. Nell joined him. The world was spread below them, a vast, painted desert. "Where?" she asked. He did not point up or out. He pointed down. "Here." He led them to a fissure in the rock, a crack wide enough for a man to slip through, that descended into the mesa itself. It was a hidden stairway. They went down into the earth, out of the wind. After 20 yards, the passage opened into a vast, sheltered alcove, a hollow in the rock, protected from the elements. The walls were covered in petroglyphs. They were ancient, carved deep into the dark desert varnish of the stone. There were scenes of hunting, of rain clouds, of men dancing, and there, in the center, on a flat, altar-like stone, was the symbol. Nell's hand went to her throat, her fingers closing on the locket. She stepped forward, her heart a drum. She held the locket up. The metal, worn and tarnished, was a perfect, small echo of the massive, deliberate carving in the stone. "Katipoa Tivoo," Tahan said, his voice hushed. He had never seen it. He had only heard the stories, the breath of the earth. "But what does it do?" May asked, her practical mind already working. She ran her fingers over the lines. "These are not just pictures. They are channels." Tahan looked at the lines, and Nell looked at the map. "He is right," Nell said, unfolding the paper. "The map is a copy of these carvings, but it is not a map of the land. It is a map of water." She traced the lines on the stone, her finger finding grooves that were not part of the carving. "This is a gate," she said, pointing to a circular symbol. "It is a plug, and this—" She pointed to a long, straight line that descended the cliff face, hidden by the fissure. "This is a spillway. This is not a church. May, this is a machine." They spent the day tracing the system. It was a work of forgotten genius. The flat top of the mesa acted as a massive rainwater cistern. The fissure they had used was the main artery. The breath was an underground network of carved stone channels, a secret river inside the rock that allowed the ancients to hold and, when they chose, release the water, letting it flow down to the plains, not in a flood, in a controlled, life-giving stream. They found the stone plugs, massive, perfectly balanced cylinders of rock that could be levered into place to stop the flow. "They could turn the river on and off," Nell whispered, in awe. While they worked, 10 miles away, in Red Bluff, Duke Mallory was gathering his own team. The nervous shopkeeper who watched the station for him had reported. "They are gone," the man said, twisting his hat. "The smithy is cold. The apothecary is locked. They have run. Deputy." Mallory smiled. He did not believe they had run. He believed they had gone to the one place that mattered. "Good," Mallory said to the hard-looking man beside him, a man with 2 pistols and a month's worth of trail dust on his coat. "Get your men. We are taking the Mesa Chaco. Mister, Brandt wants that rock clear by sunrise. No survivors, no witnesses." That night on the mesa, they huddled around a small, smokeless fire Tahan had built in a rock depression. They were exhausted, but a current of shared purpose crackled between them. Isaiah was quiet, his big hands turning a small, carved piece of stone. May was cleaning her spectacles, a sign she was thinking hard. Nell sat apart, staring into the small flames. Tahan came and sat near her, not beside her, but close. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was full. "Your mother," he said, not a question, but a beginning. "She was Comanche, I think," Nell said, her voice low. "Or part. She died when I was young. She never spoke of it. My father said she came from the south. This locket was all I have of her." "She was Newham," Tahan said with certainty, looking at the locket, which Nell held in her palm. "She was one of the people. This mark, it is the water, but it is also the spirit. To have this, she was a person of high standing, a keeper." He fell silent. The fire popped, a spark rising into the immense, dark sky. "The place where I first saw this sign," he said, his voice flat. "On a small rock, by a spring. That is where my mother and my brother were camped when the soldiers came." Nell turned to look at him. His face was a mask in the firelight. "It was not a battle," he said, his eyes on the fire, "but seeing something else, something far away and cold. They called it removal. It was winter. I was scouting. When I returned, the ground was empty. The grass was torn by wagon wheels. I followed. 2 weeks. I found them at the reservation camp. The coughing sickness. It took them in 3 days. My brother, he was 8 years old. He picked up a stick and pushed it into the fire. I have not stayed in one place since. I do not join. I do not make ties. To be free is to be alone. To be alone is to be safe." Nell was quiet for a long time. The story settled in her, a cold, familiar weight. "My husband was not a warrior," she said, her voice just as flat as his. "He was a good man. He was a dreamer. He found the copy of the water deed and he thought it made him a king. He thought it made him powerful. He went to the Dry Fork to talk to Brandt's survey crew, to tell them they had to leave his land." She looked at her hands, as if seeing the flower dust, the soap scars. "They shot him in the back. He was riding away. I found him. I brought him home." She looked at Tahan. "Mallory told me I would end up like him. Isaiah said he died for a cursed piece of paper. I have been so afraid of that, afraid of dying for nothing, afraid of waste." "You are not afraid," Tahan said, his gaze meeting hers. It was the first time he had truly looked at her, and she saw in his eyes the same echo of loss, the same hard scar she carried on her own soul.
"No," she whispered. "I am not anymore."
The silence that returned was different. It was a bond. It was the safe, quiet understanding of two people who had seen the worst of the world and had, for different reasons, decided to keep standing. The next morning, May, who had been scouting the far side of the mesa, called them. "Nell, Tehan, you need to see this." They ran to her. She was standing at the edge of the cliff, looking down into the narrows of the dry fork, a sheer 500-foot drop. Brant's operation was laid out below them like a map. They could see the teams of mules, the wagons, the small army of men, and they could see the lines of stakes, red flags marking the path of the new canal, yellow flags marking the placements for the dynamite. Nell felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. She reached into her own satchel and pulled out the only other paper she had from her husband's trunk. It was a blueprint, a survey map. She had thought it was just a failed idea, a doodle of his own. She unfolded it on the rock. It was Brant's plan. The red flags below matched the lines on the paper. The yellow flags matched the X's on the paper. And the entire massive structure of the proposed dam was centered, with chilling, lethal precision on the one spot on the cliff face where the fissure, the hidden artery of the Mesa Chaco, was set to breathe.
"Oh my God,"
May whispered. Nell traced the line on the blueprint. "He is not just damming the river. He is aiming for this. He is going to use the dynamite to seal the mesa." Tahan touched the petroglyph on the rock beside him. His face was like stone. "He does not know what he is breaking," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "He thinks this is rock. He does not see the heart. He is not building a dam. He is committing a murder." They returned under a sky the color of a fresh bruise. The 10-day deadline felt like a joke. Brant was not a man who waited for paper petitions. He was a man who moved dirt. The ride back from the mesa had been silent, the weight of their discovery settling on them like a shroud. Brant's plan was not just theft. It was strangulation. They split as they reached the town's edge, melting back into their own lives. But the bond, forged in the dust storm and the cold night, held fast. May Collins went to her apothecary. She did not sleep. She locked the door, lit a Bunsen burner, and began to work. Not as a pharmacist, but as a chemist. She ground sulfur, potassium nitrate, and charcoal, her movements precise, her face grim. She was not making a bomb. She was, as she explained to Nell later, creating an anaerobic compound. "It is stable," she said, tapping a small tin of dark powder. Her spectacles were pushed up onto her forehead. "It is a rescue tool. It will burn without air, under mud, even in wet rock. If we can get to those stone plugs, and they are choked with debris from Brant's first blasts. This will clear the artery. It will not explode. It will burn and expand and clear the breath of the earth without shattering the mesa." She held the tin out to Nell. "This is not a weapon. Nell, it is a key. We are not murderers. We are surgeons." Nell took the tin, the cold, heavy reality of it settling in her hand. In the smithy, Isaiah Cole built his own fire. The rage he had felt in town, the helplessness, had found an outlet. He was not a man of words, but of iron. He worked all day, his hammer ringing out a furious rhythm that was not for horseshoes or wagon wheels. When Nell came to him, he was cooling a piece of steel in the slack tub. It hissed, a venomous sound. "He has his dynamite," Isaiah said, his voice a low rumble. "He has his newspaper. He has his badge. It is all paper and noise." He pulled the steel from the water. It was a die, a stamp. He had, with painstaking, furious skill, carved the symbol from Nell's locket into the face of the metal. "What is it?" Nell asked. "It is a seal. he said, his great chest heaving. "The map you have, the blueprint, it is just paper. Brant will call it a forgery. But this," he held up the heavy stamp, "this is a promise. It is the mark from your mother's locket, and I am going to make another, a circle to go around it, with the county's name. We will make our own truth. Nell, we will stamp that map. We will make it official in a way no court can deny. We will bind the white man's law to the land's law." He looked at her, his eyes burning with the forge's light. He can lie about paper. Let him try to lie about steel. Nell took the path between, while May prepared her tools and Isaiah forged his. Nell went to build her own. She went to the people. She started with Pastor Hale. He was a thin, worried man, with a true faith that was often no match for the realities of Red Bluff. She found him sweeping the dust from the church steps. "Pastor," she said, "Mr. Brant is going to destroy the Dry Fork." "Mrs. Hart," he fretted. "He is bringing progress. The railroad, the canal." "He is taking the water," Nell said, her voice quiet, cutting through his excuses. "All of it. He is going to break the land. You preach about stewardship, about caring for God's creation. You preach about loving your neighbor, the farmers downriver. They are your neighbors. When their land turns to dust, will you tell them it was progress?" He stopped sweeping. He looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the woman who had buried her husband, the woman who had worked for 2 years without a single complaint. She was not a hysteric. "What do you want, Nell?" he asked, his voice now as quiet as hers. "Your signature on a petition citing the community water laws, the laws that say water is for all, not for one. We are asking for a stay. We are asking for the 10 days the law promises us." He signed. She went to the school teacher, a young woman from the East who still believed in civic duty. She signed. Nell went to the small farmers, the ones with sun-baked skin and hopeless eyes. They were afraid. To sign was to cross Brant. "He will ruin us," one said. "He is ruining you now," Nell said, her patience as thin as the dry grass. "He is just doing it slowly. I am offering a chance to fight back. All I am asking is for your name." Some turned away, but 3, their faces hard with a desperate, new anger, signed the paper. By the end of the day, she had 7 names. It was not an army, it was a start. Tahan had his own fight. He had left the mesa and gone to find his cousin, Atohi. He found him in a hidden camp with 5 other young warriors. They were not scouting. They were painting their ponies for war. "Atohi," Tahan said, his voice flat. He was not welcome here. He was the one who walked in the white man's world, the one who took their money to guide their wagons. "Cousin," Atohi sneered. "Have you come to join us or to tell us to be patient?" Atohi was young, his face a mask of rage. "I saw Brant's dynamite. I saw the yellow flags. They are going to scar the earth. They are going to murder the water. The old ones cry out for us to strike." "The old ones cry out for the water," Tahan said, his voice a cold slap. "Not for your blood, or for theirs." "It is the same thing," Atohi shouted, gesturing to the others, who held rifles. "We will strike his camp tonight. We will burn his wagons. We will use his own dynamite against him. We will give him the war he wants." "And what then?" Tahan said, his stillness a rock against Atohi's fury. "You will kill 10 of them, 20, and they will send the soldiers. They will hunt us. They will call us murderers, and they will be right. They will have their excuse. They will say the people are savage, and they will finish the dam." "It is better to die fighting than to die thirsty," one of the young men snarled. "We are not going to die," Tahan said. "We are going to win." He knelt and drew the locket symbol in the dust. "This is not just a pipe, Atohi. It is Katipo Ativoo. It is sacred. You do not honor a sacred place with fire and blood. You honor it with wisdom. The woman, the one with the locket, she is fighting with their paper laws. The smith is fighting with iron. We will fight with the land itself. He told them about the spillway. He told them about the plan to use the water, not dynamite, as their weapon. Brant thinks he fights rock. He does not know he is fighting a river. Let him build his wall. We will show him the true power. But I need you to be scouts, not warriors. I need your eyes. I need you to watch. Tell me when they move. Tell me where they are weak. Do not start a war. Help me finish one. Atohi looked at the symbol in the dust. He looked at Tahan, his cousin, the man he had called a coward. He slowly, reluctantly, nodded. We will watch, he said. But Ta, if your way fails, it will not fail. Tahan said. He stood and walked away, the promise a heavy weight on his shoulders. That night, they were to meet back at the smithy. Nell had the petition, with its 7 precious signatures. She had maize tins of anaerobic compound. She was waiting for Isaiah to finish the county seal for the stamp. May was late. She is never late, Nell said, the skin on her neck prickling. The forge was hot and loud, Isaiah working furiously on the second die. She is a careful woman, Isaiah said, not looking up. She is locking her shop. But Nell knew. The cold dread that had been her companion since her husband's death returned. I am going to check, she said. She ran the 100 yards to the apothecary. The street was dark. The door was locked, but the closed sign was crooked. Isaiah, she screamed, her voice tearing. He was there in an instant, his size belying his speed. He looked at the lock. May would not leave it this way. He did not bother with a key. He put his shoulder to the door and the frame splintered. The shop was a wreck. Bottles were shattered. Herbs and powders dusted the floor like a bitter, multicolored snow. And in the middle of the floor, gleaming in the moonlight, lay May's steel-rimmed spectacles. No, Isaiah whispered, his voice thick. He took her, Nell said, her voice hollow. She picked up the spectacles, the metal still warm. Mallory, he took her. He must have been watching, Isaiah said, his mind slow. He knew we were together. He took her to get the map, Nell said, her mind racing. He thinks she has it. What do we do? Isaiah's hands, so strong with iron, were shaking. Nell, what do we do? He took her, Nell said, to get the papers, the petition, the map. The terrible choice hung in the ruined shop, their friend, or the evidence that could save the valley. To go after May meant risking the map, the one thing that could stop Brant. To protect the map meant leaving May to... Nell could not finish the thought. A shadow moved in the doorway. He has her at the railhead. Tahan was there, his face carved from stone. He held up a small, blue bead, pinched between his thumb and forefinger. From her boot, he said. The tracks are clear. 1 woman, forced, 1 heavy man, 2 horses. They did not go to the jail. They went to Brant's office. It is a trap, Isaiah said, his voice raw. He wants us. He wants the map. Yes, Tahan said. Nell looked at Isaiah, then at Tahan. The choice was made. Isaiah, she said, her voice hard as the steel on his anvil. You are the strongest of us. You are the only one who can do this. She ran back to the smithy, grabbed the leather satchel holding the map, the blueprint, the petition, and May's compounds. She ran back and shoved it into his hands. Take this, take your mule. Ride to the county seat. Do not stop. Do not light a fire. Do not talk to anyone. Find Judge Keating. He is the only one not on Brant's payroll. Give him this, all of it. Make him listen. Nell, no, Isaiah protested. I cannot leave you. Not with him. We are 3, Tahan said, his eyes on the darkness. You are 1. You have the heavier load. You carry the paper law. We will bring back the woman. Go, Isaiah, Nell commanded.
If you stay, we all lose. If you go, we have a chance. Now, go.
He looked at her, his heart breaking. Then he nodded. Once. He slung the satchel over his massive shoulder. "Godspeed, Nell," he whispered, and he vanished into the back alley. Nell turned to Tahan. The air crackled between them.
How?
She asked. "They have guards," Tahan said. "But they are railroad men, not soldiers. They are watching for an army. They are not watching for a widow. And they are not watching for a ghost." They moved through the town like water, Tahan guiding her, his hand light on her arm, pulling her from one pool of shadow to the next. The railhead office was lit, a single defiant square of yellow in the dark. They could see two men, rifles, smoking on the porch. Tahan pointed to a stack of dry hay by the holding pen. 100 yards away. "Wait for the noise," he whispered. He put something in her hand. It was a friction match. "Light it! Run!" Before she could answer, he was gone. She waited. 1 minute, 2. Her heart was a trapped bird. Then, a sudden, high-pitched scream of a horse, followed by shouting. The two guards on the porch cursed, dropped their cigarettes, and ran toward the sound. Nell struck the match, tossed it into the hay, and ran. She did not run from the fire. She ran to the office, her feet silent in the dust. She slipped through the back door. The front of the office was empty, but she could hear voices from the storeroom. "And I'm telling you, Mr. Brandt, she will not talk. She is tougher than she looks." It was Mallory's voice, frustrated. "Then you have failed. Duke," a new voice said, cold, precise, full of a bored, absolute power. Ezekiel Brandt. Nell found the storeroom door and looked through the crack. May was there, tied to a chair. She was bruised, her lips split, but her eyes were burning with a pure, undiluted hatred. Mallory stood over her. And in the corner, a man in a clean, expensive suit was looking at a map on the wall. Brandt. "They were on the mesa," Brandt said, tapping the map. "My surveyors found their trail this evening. They found the carvings. They found the spillway. They know." He turned. "She is irrelevant. Duke, they know. Find the woman. Find the Comanche. They have the plans." Nell pushed the door open. Mallory spun, his hand dropping to his gun. "What the—" Brandt just looked at her, a flicker of mild surprise in his cold eyes. "Mrs. Hart, how predictable." "Let her go," Nell said, her voice shaking, but her hand steady on the doorframe. "Or what?" Mallory laughed. "You will cook me a bad meal." A shadow detached itself from the ceiling. Tahan dropped from the rafters, landing behind Mallory with no sound. Before Mallory could turn, Tahan had him. It was not a fight. It was a dismantling. A hand to the wrist, a twist, and Mallory's gun skidded across the floor. An elbow to the side of the head. Mallory crumpled like a sack of grain. Tahan did not look at Brandt. He went to May and with his knife cut her free. "Go," he said to Nell. Nell grabbed May, pulling her. Brandt did not move. He had not flinched. He simply watched them, a botanist observing insects. "You are too late, Mrs. Hart," he said, his voice calm. "The rescue is touching, but it is pointless. You have shown me your hand." They backed out, Tahan moving between them and the unconscious Mallory. They ran, vanishing into the darkness that had been their ally. They did not stop until they reached the edge of town, their lungs burning. May was leaning on Nell, breathing hard. "He knows," she whispered, her voice a rasp. "While I was there, before you came, a man came in, a scout. He had been tracking you. He reported. He told Brandt everything. The petroglyphs, the spillway, the channels inside the rock." As she spoke, a flash of light, bright and quick, lit the northern horizon. From the dry fork, Nell's blood ran cold. Tahan looked at the light. Then he looked at Nell. "That was a signal," he said, his voice flat. "Isaiah is on his way to the law, but Brant does not care about the law." A second flash, and a third, answering the first. "He is not waiting 10 days. Tahan said, "He is moving. He is starting. Now." The first blast was a dull thump, felt more in the bones than heard. It rolled across the plains, a heartbeat of the earth itself. Nell, Tahan, and May stood frozen at the edge of the dark town. A second flash lit the northern horizon, and then a third. Closer. Brant was not just signaling. He was working. "He is shattering the caprock," Tahan said, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion save a cold, final certainty. "He will bring the rock down into the narrows. He will make a new riverbed, and he will bury the breath under 100 feet of stone." The wind, which had been a hot, dry breath, was changing. A new cold scent was on it, the smell of ozone, of damp stone. Clouds, invisible in the blackness, were swallowing the stars. "He is starting a war he does not understand," Tahan said. He turned, not toward the dry fork, but to the small stable behind the station. "Get the horses. We ride." Without Isaiah, May's voice was thin, her bruised face a pale smudge in the dark. "He has the map. He has the compounds." "He has his path," Tahan said, pulling the saddle from a peg. "We have ours." "What can we do?" Nell asked, her hands balling into fists. "We are 3 people against an army. We have no tools, no key." "We have the mesa," Tahan said. "We have the storm, and we have the anger." He looked at her, his eyes unreadable. "It will be enough, or it will not, but we go." They rode. They did not ride to the main road. Tahan led them on the same hidden paths he had used before, a desperate, punishing gallop through the growing dark. The wind was rising, a high, thin keen that tore at their clothes. A single, jagged fork of lightning split the sky, illuminating the world in a stark, momentary blue. In that flash, Nell saw the dry fork narrows, the wooden cranes of Brant's work site stark against the cliff, and she saw the line of pack mules, heavy with explosives, being led up a new, raw trail. The thunder that followed was immediate, a crack that sounded as if the sky had split in two. The first drops of rain, huge and cold, began to fall. By the time they reached the base of Mesa Chaco, it was a deluge. The wind was a solid wall, trying to tear them from their saddles. "We must climb," Tahan yelled over the roar. "The path will wash out." They left the horses, tethering them in the small, rocky lee that had sheltered them from the dust storm. It seemed a lifetime ago. They began to climb, the path now a treacherous, muddy sluice. They were halfway up when a new sound cut through the storm, a massive, grinding crack, followed by a roar that shook the mesa to its foundations. "He is blasting!" May screamed, her voice whipped away by the wind. "He is breaking the wall!" "He is too fast," Nell said, her heart sinking. They were too late. They clawed their way to the top, collapsing onto the flat, soaking rock, and that is where they saw him. Isaiah Cole. He was not at the county seat. He was here, huddled against the altar stone, the one carved with the sacred symbol. He was a giant, soaked, miserable, and defeated. At his feet was the leather satchel. "Isaiah," Nell whispered, disbelieving. He looked up, his face a mask of shame and anguish. "I could not," he said, his voice a hoarse rumble. "I rode 10 miles. I saw the flashes. I saw the storm." He struck the rock with his huge fist. "I am a smith. I make things. I do not run with paper while you ride into this." He shoved the satchel toward her. "I failed you." Tahan grabbed the front of Isaiah's shirt, hauling him to his feet. He did not look angry.
He looked alive. You did not fail, Tahan said, his voice ringing. You are where you were meant to be. The earth called you back. He turned to May. Get the compounds, now. May's hands were shaking as she pulled the tins from the satchel. The fuses will be wet. It does not need a fuse, she said, her own voice finding its strength. It is anaerobic. It just needs a spark. Another blast from below. This one heavier, more powerful. The mesa shuddered, and a section of the cliff edge not 20 yards from them tore away, vanishing into the roar. They are trying to bring the whole cliff down. Nell yelled, They will bury the spillway. To the fissure, Tahan commanded. They ran, scrambling into the hidden passage, the storm howling at their backs. The petroglyphs were lit in the flickering, mad light of the lightning. The air in the passage was thick, but it was dry. Tahan led them to the main plug, the massive stone cylinder they had marveled at. But it was not clear. The preliminary blasts had already done their work. The channel was choked. Rocks and debris, shaken loose from above, had jammed the ancient mechanism. We cannot move it, Isaiah said, putting his shoulder to the stone. It did not budge. We do not move it, May said. She was packing her compound into the cracks, her fingers working with desperate, practiced speed. We clear it. Tahan, Nell said, her mind working. A kitchen inventory, a list of needs. We need to see. From the top. We need to know when the water is high enough. And we need to signal May. The water is already high enough. Tahan said, The storm is filling the cistern. The danger is the next blast. They will set it off all at once. Then I need to coordinate, Nell said, her voice firm. She grabbed a small signal lantern from her own pack, the one she used for the station. She pulled a compass from her pocket. Tahan, you stay here. You know the mechanism. May, you have the key. Isaiah, you are the strength. I will go to the overlook. I will be your eyes. Tahan grabbed her arm. His hand was warm, his gaze intense. Nell, they will have guards. They will be looking for warriors, Nell said, pulling a spare oilcloth over the lantern. They are not looking for me. She left them. She scrambled back up the fissure to the cliff edge, her stomach a cold knot. The storm was a symphony of chaos. Below, the dry fork was a raging, muddy torrent. The work site was a pit of frantic activity, lit by lanterns and the flashes of lightning. Men were running, shouting, carrying wooden crates. She saw the main line, a long, thick fuse running from a generator shed to a dozen points on the cliff face, all aimed at the heart of the mesa. She found a high point, a boulder that overlooked both the work site and the hidden entrance to the fissure. She was soaked in seconds, her hair plastered to her face. She held the compass, trying to steady the needle, to give her team a bearing, to give herself a point of sanity. Then she saw him. Duke Mallory. He was not with the main crew. He had climbed, somehow, from the other side. He was 50 yards away. On a ledge just below her, he was not looking at the work. He was looking at the fissure. He knew. Brant's scout must have told him. He was waiting for them. He raised his rifle, not at her, but down, into the dark crack of the fissure. He was aiming at where Tahan and the others would be. Nell did not think. She did not have a rifle. She had the station, she had the kitchen, she had a piece of a wooden plank, a spare from the station's repair bin, that she had packed in her saddle roll. Just in case, it was useless. Mallory levered a shell into the chamber. Nell grabbed the lantern, but she did not light it. She ran, stumbling, sliding on the wet rock, toward the fissure, but from the side, placing herself between Mallory and the hidden entrance. Tahan, she screamed, her voice ripped away by the wind. Mallory heard. He spun, his rifle coming up. He saw her, a wild, soaked woman, a ghost in the storm. Heart, he snarled, a look of pure, animal hatred on his face. He fired,
The bullet was a hot, angry fist. Nell was already falling, slipping on the slick rock, and she did not see it. She felt the impact, a sharp, splintering thwack. She looked down. The bullet had not hit her. It had hit the useless piece of planking she was still carrying, tucked in her belt. The wood had shattered, driving a dozen sharp splinters into her side, through her wet shirt. It was not a bullet wound, but it was deep, and it was agonizing. She cried out, a short, sharp gasp, and fell to her knees. "Damn you, witch!" Mallory yelled, chambering another round. He raised the rifle for a killing shot. He never fired. A shape, massive and black, rose from the fissure behind him. Isaiah Cole. He was not a smith. He was a god of vengeance, his forge hammer in his hand. He did not use the flat of the hammer. He used the claw. He swung it, not at Mallory's head, but at his rifle. The sound of steel on steel was a scream, and the rifle was ripped from Mallory's hands, spinning into the darkness. Mallory stared, his eyes wide with terror, at the giant in front of him. He pulled his pistol, but Isaiah was on him. He did not hit him. He simply grabbed him, his left hand swallowing Mallory's entire shoulder. He lifted the deputy off his feet and held him, dangling over the 500-foot drop. "No!" Mallory screamed, his legs kicking. "No, please!" "She is hurt," Isaiah said, his voice a low, terrible rumble. He looked at Nell, saw the blood on her shirt. "Isaiah, no!" Nell cried, clutching her side. Do not be him!" Isaiah held Mallory for a long, terrible second, the storm raging around them. Then, with a grunt of disgust, he hauled him back and threw him to the rock, senseless. "May!" he roared. May was there, her bag in her hand, Tahan beside her. "The compound is set," Tahan said. He looked at Nell, his gaze taking in the blood, the shattered wood. His face was unreadable. "You are hurt." "Just splinters," Nell gasped, as May was already at her side, ripping the cloth. "We need the spark," Tahan said. "Now, the main blast." As he said it, a series of whistles shrieked from below. The final signal. "It is set," May said, her voice shaking. "I just need—" Tahan did not wait. He pulled his pistol, aimed it not at an enemy, but at the rock, at the spot May had packed. "Cover!" he yelled. He fired. It was not an explosion. It was a whoosh, a deep, guttural sigh from the earth. The anaerobic compound ignited, a contained, white-hot river of fire that burned into the rock. For a second, nothing. Then, a low, grinding groan. The mesa shuddered. The choked debris, the rock, the mud, all superheated and expanded by the compound, was blown clear. The ancient stone plug, free at last, slammed into place. And the river, the second river, the one held inside the cistern of the mesa, was unleashed. It did not come from the fissure. It came from the spillway, the breath of the earth, a dozen hidden channels, a torrent of white water, 100,000 gallons, burst from the cliff face, 100 feet above Brant's main dynamite line. It was a waterfall, born of lightning and ancient engineering. It hit the line of explosives just as the generator's charge reached them. The water, a solid, cleansing wall, drowned the fuses, soaked the dynamite, and tore the wooden cranes from their moorings. It was a flood, a baptism, a full stop. Below, men were screaming, running for their lives, not from an enemy, but from the land itself. The chain reaction was broken. The great final blast was neutralized. Brant's work was not just stopped, it was washed away. On the cliff top, Tahan stood, his rifle smoking, watching the water save them. Isaiah stood guard over the unconscious Mallory, and May pressed a thick compress to Nell's side, her hands, finally, steady. Nell looked at Tahan.
He was watching the water, his face lit by the storm, and for the first time, she saw it. It was not a smile. It was something deeper. It was a look of profound and terrible peace. He had kept his promise. He had let the land fight for itself. The thunder was a distant drum now, rolling east, chasing the worst of the storm. On the mesa, the wind was just wind, cold and clean. Below, the dry fork roared, a new, living thing in the darkness, its voice victorious. Brant's dynamite was silent, his work site a submerged ruin. "We cannot stay on this rock." May's voice was sharp, cutting through the sudden, exhausted silence. She was kneeling over Nell, her hands pressed tight to her side. The rain had washed the blood away, but the compress she had made from her own apron was already dark. "These splinters are deep, and they are filthy. This is not a bullet. This is poison." Nell gritted her teeth, a low sound of pain. "I am fine. Just get me up." Tahan looked at her. Her face was a pale smudge in the gloom, her lips blue with cold. "You are lying," he said. He turned to Isaiah, who was tying Mallory's hands with a length of rope from his own saddle. The deputy was moaning, stirring back to consciousness. "He is my burden," Isaiah rumbled, his voice thick with disgust. He hefted the deputy over his massive shoulder as if he were a sack of wet grain. "You take May. Get her to her shop. This trash belongs in a cell." "The jail is Mallory's house," May said, her voice thin and worried. "His men." "Not tonight," Isaiah said. "Tonight, it is just a box, and I have the key." "No," Tahan said. His eyes were on Nell, who was shivering, a deep, rattling tremor that shook her whole frame. "We do not go to the town. Not yet." He looked at Isaiah, a command in his gaze. "Brant is still there. His men are angry. The fight is not over. It is only quiet. Can you get him to your forge? Can you hold him?" Isaiah nodded, a slow, grim understanding. "He will be secure. The forge will be his cell." "May," Tahan commanded. "Go with him. You will be safe there. But first, your bag." May looked at Tahan, then at Nell, who was swaying, her eyes closing. She understood. She ripped the leather medical bag from her shoulder and shoved it at Tahan. "Clean it," she ordered, her professionalism returning. "Carbolic, 2 full drams in the water. She has a fever coming. If you can. Laudanum, 2 drops, no more." "Go," Tahan said. Isaiah and May vanished into the muddy fissure, one carrying the lawbreaker, the other carrying the means to heal. Tahan was left alone with Nell. The storm, which had been their enemy, was now their shield, its noise and fury covering their retreat. He pulled Nell's arm over his shoulder, taking her weight. "I can walk," she gasped, her legs failing her. "No," he said. He bent, and with a strength that was fluid and absolute, he lifted her into his arms. He carried her as if she weighed nothing. He carried her as a burden that was precious, a life he had chosen to save. He began the treacherous descent, his feet finding holds in the mud and slick rock as if by instinct. He did not go toward the town. He went toward the hidden wash where he kept his own camp. He found a small, hidden place, a line rider's old lean-to, a forgotten canvas sheet tied between 2 ancient junipers, half buried in a sandy overhang. It was a pathetic shelter, but it was out of the direct rain. The canvas was soaked, water dripping through in a dozen places, but it broke the relentless, cold wind. He laid her down gently on his own bedroll, the only dry thing in the world. She was shivering violently now, her teeth chattering, a sound he could hear even over the rain. The splinters, the cold, the shock. They were a poison, just as May had said. "So cold," she whispered, her eyes closed. Tahan worked with a speed and economy that was like a dance. He was not the warrior now. He was the survivor. In 5 minutes,
He had a fire, not a blaze, but a small, smokeless, intensely hot fire built from the dry sticks and tinder he carried in an oiled pouch. He built it in a small hollow in the rock, sheltering it with his own body until it caught. The small space began to fill with a weak, smoky warmth. He lit a small lantern. In the flickering light, her face was flushed, her eyes too bright. Fever. "This will hurt," he said, not as an apology, but as a fact. He took May's bag. He had water in his canteen, the bottle of carbolic acid, and a sharp, thin knife. May said, "I must clean it." "Just pull them out," Nell gritted, her voice tight. "I am not a child." "No," he said, his voice gentle but impossibly firm. "The wood is poison. It must be clean, all of it." He spent the next hour in a state of meticulous, agonizing care. He washed his hands with the carbolic. Then he washed the wound. He used the tip of his knife, sterilized in the flame, to find the splinters. Some were small, but others were buried deep, driven into the muscle of her side by the force of the bullet. She did not scream. She made a low, tight sound, her fists clenching the bedroll until her knuckles were white. He cleaned every cut, his touch surprisingly, impossibly delicate for a man whose hands were scarred and hard. He was a man who knew how to stitch a wound, how to set a bone. He had. She realized through the haze of pain, spent a lifetime taking care of himself. When he was done, he bandaged her with clean linen from May's bag. He measured 2 drops of laudanum into a tin cup of water and held her head, making her drink. She lay back, her breath ragged. The shivering had eased, replaced by the dry heat of the fever. The small tent was filled with the smell of wet wool, wood smoke, and the sharp, clean scent of the carbolic. He sat back on his heels, watching her. The rain on the canvas was a steady, rhythmic drumming. He was a shape in the firelight, a guardian, absolutely still. She was quiet for a long time, the laudanum and the fever blurring the edges of the world. He was a shadow, a presence, a warmth. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice husky. "You saved us," he said, his voice a low rumble in the small space. "You took the shot." "The wood. A stupid piece of wood from the station." She tried to laugh, but it came out as a pained cough. "My husband, he died, for a piece of paper. And I am just a widow, a woman who runs a kitchen. I am not what you are. I am not a warrior." He did not answer. He just watched her, his face a mask of shadows. She looked at the rough canvas ceiling, the sound of the rain filling her head. She had faced Brant, she had faced Mallory, she had faced the storm, but this quiet, this profound intimacy was more terrifying. For 2 years, she had built a wall around herself, a wall of practicality, of flour and beans and balanced ledgers, to keep the world from touching her again. And this man, with his silence and his honor, had walked right through it, as if it were not there. She was damaged. She was a widow. She was a woman who was, at this moment, bleeding on his bedroll. She turned her head, the movement a painful effort. The firelight caught the moisture in her eyes. I am a mess," she whispered, the admission costing her everything, all the pride, all the strength she had hoarded for 2 years. "My land is gone, my past. I am just a widow with a bloody shirt." She looked at him, and the question that came was not from her mind. It was from her soul. It was the question of a woman who felt she had nothing left to offer. It was her entire, broken, terrified heart. "You still want me?" Tahan's stillness became absolute. The rain, the fire, the world, it all paused. He moved, shifting from his heels to sit beside her on the bedroll. He did not touch her, not yet. He looked at her, and his eyes were not the flat, hard eyes of the warrior on the ridge. They were the eyes of the man who had lost his brother, the man who had followed the wagon tracks, The man who had been alone for 10 years.
A smile, small and slow, touched his mouth. It was a new, strange thing, a sunrise in a hard land. It transformed his face, chasing the shadows. He reached out, his fingers, clean from the carbolic, traced not her skin, but the edge of the clean white bandage at her side, a touch of impossible respect, a touch that honored the wound. Always, he said. His voice was a low, rough promise that sent a shiver through her, a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. From the moment I saw you face the dust storm and not break, from the moment you held your mother's locket, I chose you then. I chose you forever. The word settled in the small tent. Forever. It was a word that had been stolen from both of them. Nell closed her eyes, and a single tear escaped, cutting a clean path through the grime on her cheek. You do not know me. Tahan, I am afraid, all the time. I was afraid tonight. I ran. You were afraid, he corrected, his hand finally settling on her shoulder, a weight of pure, solid warmth that sank into her bones. But you moved. You climbed. You stood. You ran toward the shot. That is not fear. That is courage. It is the only courage that matters. He sat back, pulling his own blanket around his shoulders, staring into the small, hot fire. His own confession, his own fear, was rising. I am the one who is afraid, he said, his voice so low she had to strain to hear it. You are not free. You are like the trees by the river. You are tied. To this land, to this town, to your paper laws. And you are free, she whispered, like the wind, the high plains. Yes, he said, and the word was bitter, a taste of ash. I am free. When my mother and brother died, they were penned. The sickness was a pen. The reservation was a pen. I was pulled into their world, and when they were gone, I was left behind. I swore I would not be tied to anyone again. To be tied is to be left. To be free is to be alone. To be alone is to be safe. And to be alone, Nell said, her voice finding a new strength, the laudanum and the fever giving way to a fierce, sudden clarity, is its own kind of prison, Tahan, a cold one. She reached out, her hand weak, her fingers finding his. She held on, an anchor. You are not free if you are running. I am not free if I am hiding. What we did tonight, that was not just about the water. No, he said, his thumb moving slowly over her knuckles. It was not. But the fight, it is not over, she said, her practical nature returning like the tide. Brant is still there. He is a rich man. He will not just leave. Isaiah is in the town with a prisoner. The law has not spoken. The law will speak, he said, his voice certain. Isaiah will have found the judge by now. The flood will be the proof. The land has spoken. And us, she asked, her voice small again, the fear returning. What? What about us, your people, my life, the station? They are just things. Tahan said, you are Nium, Comanche, your mother's blood. And you are Nell, the woman who runs the kitchen. You are both. I am a warrior, and I am the man who holds your hand. We are both. He looked at her, his gaze clear, stripping away all confusion. After, when Brant is broken, when the water is safe for all, we will talk of this. Talk, she said, a small, tired smile touching her lips. My people, he said, his voice careful, as if testing the words. Have a way. We choose a partner. We stand before the people. We are bound, your people. They have a man in a black coat and paper. A dual ceremony, Nell whispered, the idea both impossible and perfectly, wonderfully right. A church and the council of the tribe. Yes, he said, his hand tightening on hers. "We will find a path between. We will not betray our roots. We will plant new ones, together." It was a promise, more real than a deed, more powerful than a dam. He sat with her, holding her hand, as the storm finally broke. The rain gentled, the thunder rolled away, leaving only the sound of the dripping canvas and the steady, joyous roar of the water. A new, clean life flowing through the dry fork. He tended the fire, and she, for the first time in 2 years, did not dream of the past. She did not dream of loss or of ghosts. She held the hand of the man beside her, and, wrapped in the cold, wet canvas, she slept. The dawn broke cold and clean. The air washed of all dust. The sky was a pale, high blue. From the small, damp shelter of the lean-to, Nell heard the new sound first. It was not the wind. It was the river. A steady, powerful roar, the sound of life itself. Her side was a dull, hot ache, but the fever had broken. The shivering was gone. Tahan had tended the fire all night, and his presence, more than the laudanum or the small flame, had been the anchor that held her. She sat up, the movement stiff, and saw he was already gone. She pushed herself to her feet, her head swimming, but her mind clear. The world was new. The dry fork, which had been a sandy, cracked memory, was now a true river, brown and churning, fully occupying its banks. He returned as she was rebandaging her side, his moccasins silent on the wet ground. He carried no weapons, only his own stillness. His eyes met hers, and in the clear morning light, the promise they had made in the dark, wet canvas shelter held, it was real. "The town is awake," he said, his voice low. "Isaiah holds the deputy at the forge, the judge. He is a man named Keating. He has agreed to a hearing. He was woken at 4 in the morning by a very large, very angry smith, carrying a very important satchel." "Isaiah," Nell whispered, a small, grateful smile. "He did not fail." "He did not." Tahan said, "Now we must not. Brant is already there." They rode back not as fugitives, but as witnesses. When they entered Red Bluff, the town was a changed place. The streets were rivers of mud. The air was full of shouting. But it was not the sound of panic. It was the sound of awe. Men were standing by the newly filled creek, staring at the water as if it were a miracle. The hearing was held in the courthouse, which was really just the town's largest wooden building, smelling of old paper and new mud. It was packed. The floor was tracked with dirt, the air thick with the smell of wet wool and nervous sweat. Nell and Tahan entered. A path cleared. Tahan did not sit, but stood by the back wall, his arms crossed, his presence a silent challenge to the entire room. He was a man of the hills, but today he had brought the hills to the town. Nell, her side aching, walked with May to the front. May's face was a map of bruises, her small, defiant jaw set. Isaiah was there, sitting on a bench built for smaller men, his huge hands resting on his knees. He looked exhausted and powerful. On the other side of the room sat Ezekiel Brant. He was immaculate. His suit was brushed, his shoes shined, his hair combed. He looked as if he had slept in a feather bed, not a man whose entire enterprise had been washed away. He was flanked by a thin, sharp lawyer from the city. He looked at Nell, and his eyes were not angry. They were cold, like a snake's. Judge Keating sat at the front, a small, gray man who looked as if he had not slept at all. He looked old, and he looked terrified. The leather satchel Isaiah had carried was on the desk beside him, unopened. This is an emergency hearing," Judge Keating began, his voice thin. "Called to address the events of last night, the destruction of Brant and Company property at the Dry Fork Narrows, and the felonious assault and abduction of Deputy Duke Mallory." Brant's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, we are here to demand justice. We have contracts, filed with the territory, approved by the railroad, ensuring Mr.
Brant's right to improve the water flow of the dry fork. Last night, that legal, peaceful work was violently attacked by a conspiracy of saboteurs. He presented Brant's contracts, a thick, impressive stack of papers. Mr. Brant was and is acting fully within the law. And Deputy Mallory, the judge asked, avoiding Brant's gaze. Assaulted in the line of duty? The lawyer said smoothly. By that man, he pointed at Isaiah. He was abducted, beaten, and held against his will, while this conspiracy completed its work of destruction. Brant himself stood, his voice calm and reasonable. Judge, I am a simple man of progress. I want what is best for Red Bluff. Water is prosperity. These people, they have chosen violence. They have chosen to live in the past. They have consorted with savages. His gaze flicked to Tahan. And they have cost this territory hundreds of thousands of dollars. The room was hushed. It was a strong case. Paper, law, money. Mrs. Hart, the judge said, his voice trembling slightly. You were named. Do you have a response? Nell stood. Her side throbbed. A dull fire. She looked not at the judge, but at the farmers, at Pastor Hale, at the worried, divided faces in the crowd. We did not destroy anything, she said, her voice clear, finding its strength. The land spoke. Mr. Brant did not tell you the truth. She walked to the desk. Judge, Mr. Brant has his contracts. We have the truth. She opened the satchel. She did not take out the petition. She took out the blueprint, Brant's own blueprint. This is Mr. Brant's plan, she said, unrolling it. He was not improving a river. He was aiming dynamite at the heart of the Mesa Chaco. He was trying to murder a sacred ancient water system. That is absurd, the lawyer shouted. That map is meaningless. It is his, Nell said. And this... She took out the map, the one Isaiah had stamped, the seal of the locket and the county embossed in the very paper. This is the true map. This is the breath of the earth. A forgery, the lawyer yelled. A child's drawing. It is not, Isaiah said, his voice a low rumble that silenced the room. I made the stamp. I forged it from the steel of my fire, from the symbol of her mother's blood. It is as real as the iron in the ground. May stood, her small voice cutting. I was there. I saw the channels. I saw the ancient gates. He was going to destroy it. This is fantasy. Brant's lawyer was red-faced. The ramblings of a smith, a woman who sells herbs, and a grieving widow. What proof is there? Where are these? Ancient systems, who can speak for them? The back door of the courthouse opened. Tahan stepped aside. 3 old men, their faces like the wind-carved rock of the mesas, entered the room. They were Comanche. They wore no paint, no feathers. They wore their age, their dignity, and their history. A Tohi and 2 other young warriors flanked them, not as guards, but as students. The room gasped. This was not allowed. Tahan walked to the front, standing beside Nell. He did not look at Brant. He looked at the judge. Judge Keating, Tahan said, his voice clear. You asked who can speak for the Mesa. These men are the keepers. Their grandfathers told them the stories. They have come to speak. An old man, his hair white, stepped forward. He looked at Brant, and his eyes held no fear. He spoke, his voice dry, like leaves, in the Comanche tongue. Tahan translated, his own voice resonating with the power of the words. He says, the stone is holy. He says Katipo Ativoo is the heart of the mother. When the people starved, when the great drought came, the mother breathed and gave them water. It is not a river, it is a gift. The man who sells a gift, he is a fool. The man who breaks a gift, he is a monster. He breaks the world. The room was silent, caught in the spell. The power of Brant's contract seemed to shrivel.
Brant leaned to his lawyer, his eyes slits, his calm finally breaking. He whispered. The lawyer smiled, a vicious, sharp expression. This is all very touching, folklore, superstition, but it is not law, and it does not change the facts. The fact is, a crime was committed. Judge, I have witnesses. He called them, 2 of Brant's men, their faces scrubbed, their hands on Bibles. They lied, their voices flat. They swore they saw Isaiah and Tahan with fuses. They swore they saw Nell signaling with a lantern. They blew it all up. Judge, they did it. The room divided. Liars, someone shouted. Hang them, another yelled back, pointing at Isaiah. The social conflict, the fear and greed, exploded. Order. Judge Keating banged his gavel, his face pale. He was losing control. The railroad, the contracts. He was a small man in a very large trap. And now, the lawyer said, playing his final card, we will hear from the victim himself. Bring in Deputy Mallory. Mallory was brought in, his hands bound. He looked bruised, his uniform torn. He looked at Isaiah with pure hatred. He did it, Mallory screamed, lunging against the man who held him. That blacksmith, he tried to kill me. He threw me from the cliff. Is that true, Isaiah? The judge asked, his voice a whisper. I stopped him, Isaiah said, his voice pained. I did not. He is a lying giant, Mallory shrieked. And she is a witch, she and the savage. They planned it all. They even stole my logbook to cover their tracks. He was desperate, just saying words, but he had said the wrong one. He is lying. Judge, May Collins said, her voice like ice. Mallory froze. His eyes widened. Mr. Mallory, May continued, seems to misplace his ledgers. When he held me against my will in Mr. Brant's office, he was very careless. He was bragging about all the money he was making, about how he owned the law. Brant shot her a look of pure venom. When Mrs. Hart and Tahan rescued me, May said, reaching into her own bag, I found this. It had fallen. She held up a small, black leather book, not her own, Mallory's. That is a lie. That is my private. Mallory screamed, but it was too late. This is his private account book, May said. She opened it. He is a very meticulous man. He keeps track of all his income. She read, her voice ringing in the silent room. October 4th, from Brant & Company, $500 for persuading farmers on the South Ridge. The farmers gasped. October 9th, May read, her voice cold. $1,000 for securing the deed from the Hart station. This is inadmissible, Brant's lawyer shouted, but his voice was shaking. October 12th, May said, her eyes locked on Brant. $2,000 for clearing the mesa and handling any native interference. She is a thief. Mallory was a wild animal, pulling against his guard. He saw the stamped map on the judge's desk, the one piece of physical evidence that tied it all together. It is all lies. That map is a fake. He broke free. He lunged. Not at May, but at the desk, his hands clawing, trying to grab the map, to tear it, to destroy the one thing that proved the mesa's sacred geography. No, Nell shouted. Isaiah moved, a mountain in motion, blocking him. But it was not Isaiah who stopped him. It was a sound, a low, wet, gurgling sound. It came from the floor. A man in the back yelped. My boots! The floor it is wet. A dark, muddy stain was spreading from the corners of the room. Water was bubbling up, cold and filthy, between the floorboards. What in God's name? Judge Keating stood up, his feet splashing. The room, so full of noise, went silent. They all heard it, the groan of saturated wood, the rush of water. Nell looked at Tahan. Tahan was looking at the water, and his face was impassive, but his eyes were alive. Nell stood. She did not need to shout. Her voice, clear and true, filled the room. "It is the other dam, Judge." What dam?" Keating asked, his panic rising as the water swirled around his ankles. Mr. Brandt's other dam," Nell announced, her voice ringing. "The one he built last week, in secret, the one he built with green wood and cheap nails, to hide the water he was already stealing the flood from the mesa, the one the land sent. It was too much for his cheap, secret work. It is breaking." As she spoke the words, the courthouse doors burst open, not from a person, but from the pressure, a wave of brown, churning water, knee-deep, surged into the room. It was the dry fork. It was the land. It was the truth, and it was flooding the courtroom. Men were shouting, climbing on benches. Brandt's lawyer was sputtering, his fine city suit soaked. Ezekiel Brandt himself was standing in a foot of muddy water, his face a mask of disbelief, his contracts, his paper, floating away. Judge Keating was standing on his bench, his robes hiked up, soaked to the waist. He was a small, gray man, but the water had washed away his fear. It had baptized him. He was furious. "Silence," he roared, his voice cracking. He did not have his gavel. It was floating somewhere near the stove. He pointed a shaking wet finger at Ezekiel Brandt. Mr. Brandt, your project is a clear and present danger. It is a fraud. It is a public menace." "Judge, this is—" Brandt began. "It is over," Keating yelled. "I am freezing this project indefinitely. All work is to cease." He turned his gaze on the sputtering, soaked Mallory. "And you, Duke Mallory, I'm stripping you of your badge, your office, and your freedom. You are under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, and assault." "Judge," Brandt protested, his power gone, his voice just the whine of a wet, rich man. "And you, sir." Keating was magnificent in his wet, righteous anger. "You will pay for this. You will pay for all of this. You will pay to repair this town. You will pay to compensate the farmers. And by God, sir, you will pay to have this courthouse cleaned." He looked at Nell, and Ta, and Isaiah, and May. They were standing together, soaked, bruised, but unbroken. A small, strong island in the flood. "This hearing," the judge sputtered, "is over." The flood in the courthouse was the beginning of the end, and the start of everything else. The water receded as quickly as it had come, leaving a thick, foul-smelling layer of mud over Judge Keating's floor, and over Ezekiel Brandt's ambitions. Brandt did not stay for the cleanup. He did not make a speech. His lawyer, soaked and humiliated, was gone by the next morning's stagecoach. Brandt himself was gone by evening. He did not ride out like a conqueror. He took a single, plain wagon, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. He was a man who had been beaten not by a better plan, but by the land itself. He was not just defeated. He was, in the West, a sinner. He had disrespected the water. He was, in part, a ruined man. Judge Keating, in his waterlogged righteousness, had put a lien on all of Brandt and Company's local assets to pay for the damages. The dynamite, the lumber, the cranes, the wagons. The tools, they all sat at the mouth of the dry fork, a monument to a rich man's folly, rusting in the new, clean air. Duke Mallory's fate was simpler. He was held in Isaiah's forge for 2 days, a strange, silent prisoner, until a federal marshal arrived from the county seat. The marshal, a man unimpressed by local politics, took one look at May's bruised face, at Mallory's black ledger, and at the flooded courthouse, and he shackled the deputy. Duke Mallory was led away, his shrieks about conspiracy and thievery fading into the clean, empty prairie. He was a small, loud noise that had finally been silenced. A week later,
The auction was held. Brant's assets were sold on the courthouse steps, the same steps that were still warped and stained with mud. The town was tense. The men who had worked for Brant were there, their faces angry. They were out of work, and their pay was gone. Judge Keating, acting as auctioneer, looked at the crowd. "We sell these goods to pay for the rebuilding." The farmers, the small ranchers, were there, but they had no money. They watched, their hopes fading, as the railroad agent began to bid on the heavy equipment. Then Nell Hart stepped forward, Tahan at her side. Tahan said nothing, but his presence, his sheer, quiet authority, made the railroad man pause. "The farmers of this valley," Nell said, her voice clear, "have formed a new company, the Dry Fork Water Cooperative. We bid $100 for all of it." It was a laughably small sum. The agent sneered. $100, madam. That steam shovel is worth 10,000. "It is worth nothing," Tahan said, his voice a low, flat rumble that carried over the crowd. "It sits on land that does not belong to the railroad. It sits on the land of the people, and it sits on the land of these men." He gestured to the farmers. "Move it, and you are a thief. Leave it, and it rots. The co-op is offering you $100 for your trash." The agent looked at Tahan. He looked at the hard, united faces of the farmers. He looked at the silent, watchful Comanche who had appeared on the ridge. Tahan's cousin Atohi among them. He did not see a bargain. He saw a war he could not win. "Sold," he spat. The farmers did not get a steam shovel. They got lumber. They got rope. They got tools. They got, with Isaiah's guidance, the materials to build their own future. And the men who had worked for Brant, they stood a sullen, unemployed mob. Nell, Isaiah, and May approached them. "We are not building one dam," Nell said to them, her voice carrying the new authority she had earned. "We are building 20. We are building a new system, a community system, based on the Mesa's design." She unrolled the stamped map. "We need workers. We cannot pay Brant's wages, but we can pay a fair wage. And you will be building something that lasts. You will be building for yourselves, for your own families." The men, who had been ready to fight, looked at their empty hands. They looked at the pile of lumber. They looked at Isaiah, who had already begun to draw plans in the dirt. One by one, they picked up the tools. The riot was avoided. The work began. The weeks that followed were a blur of hard, shared labor. Nell, to her own surprise, sold the stagecoach station. It was too small for her. The kitchen, the ledgers, they were a part of a life that was over. She sold it to Pastor Hale's congregation, to be used as a proper church and school, and she put every dollar into the new co-op. Isaiah was its muscle, May, its mind, and Nell was its heart. They worked with the Comanche. The elders came, the keepers of the water, and they showed Isaiah and the farmers where the ancient channels truly lay. They were not building a single, massive wall. They were building a series of low, strong, terraced dams, small check dams that slowed the water, spread it, and let it sink into the thirsty earth, replenishing the aquifers, healing the land. It was the design of the Mesa. It was the law of the earth. To make it permanent, they made 2 agreements. The first was paper. Nell, May, and the farmers signed the articles of the Dry Fork Water Cooperative. It set shares. It set rules for use. It was a white man's promise, binding and clear. The second was stone. Tahan took Isaiah not to the forge, but to the Mesa. There, with the old men watching, they carved the agreement, the same agreement, into a new stone. They did not carve legal words. They carved the symbols, the Mesa, the river, the people, the circle of the community. It was a promise to the land that it would never be choked again. Tahan's role in the new world was one he forged for himself. He was no longer a ghost, a scout for hire. He was a bridge. He formed the water patrol. He chose Atohi, whose anger had cooled into a fierce, protective pride. He chose 2 of the sons of the farmers, young men who had grown up fearing the Comanche and now worked beside them. They rode the line. They were the mediators, the rescue, the repair crew. When a farmer took too much water, it was Tahan who appeared, silent on his pony, and pointed to the stone carving. When a channel broke, it was the patrol that arrived to fix it. He was not a warrior, and he was not a chief. He was, like Nell, a guardian. The new life settled, but the old one left its ghosts. One evening, as the sun was setting, Nell walked to the small, dusty graveyard behind the new church. She had not been there in months. She found her husband's grave, the small wooden markers she had carved herself. The splinters in her side had healed, leaving a scar, a pale, puckered reminder. She lit a single candle and placed it on the hard earth. She was not the woman who had wept here. She was not the frightened, angry widow. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice low, for the man who had, in his own fumbling way, left her the key to her own life. You were a good man. You are just lost. I am not lost anymore." She said goodbye, a quiet, final release. Miles away, on the high plain, Tahan did the same. He stood at the place where his mother and brother had been taken. He built a small fire. He burned sweetgrass, the smoke rising straight and clean in the cold air. He was honoring the dead, but he was no longer haunted by them. He was not running. He had found a place to stand. The 2 families met at the forge. It was not a meeting, but a happening. Tahan had brought his mother. She was an old woman, her face a map of a hard life, her eyes as sharp and clear as his. She was small, and she radiated an authority that made the forge, with its massive tools, seem small. She walked past Tahan, past Isaiah. She walked to Nell. She looked her up and down. She looked at Nell's strong hands that were no longer soft from kitchen work, but calloused from rope and stone. She looked at the healing scar on Nell's side. She touched, for a brief moment, the locket at Nell's throat. Then she nodded. Once. She reached into a small pouch at her belt and pulled out a small, carved piece of juniper wood, tied with a single hawk feather. A wind charm. She pressed it into Nell's hand. It was a blessing. It was acceptance. Pastor Hale, who had come to see Isaiah about a new hinge, saw the exchange. He saw the old Comanche woman give her blessing. He saw Nell, her eyes shining. He saw Tahan, standing beside her, his hand resting, for the first time in public, on her shoulder. The pastor's face, usually so worried, broke into a wide, simple smile. He walked over, and he placed his own hand over theirs. "Amen," he said, his voice full. God bless this, all of it." The town and the people came together 2 weeks later. It was not a holiday. It was a thanksgiving for the water. It was held at the side of the new, living river, the Dry Fork. As the sun went down, the Comanche lit a fire, a great, crackling blaze. A towhee and the young men danced, their feet pounding the earth, the beat of their drums a heartbeat, a prayer. On the other side of the clearing, Pastor Hale and the townspeople sang. They sang Amazing Grace, their voices rising, thin and hopeful in the vast, open night. The 2 sounds, the drumbeat and the hymn, did not fight. They mixed. They rose together. A new song, a new, strange, and beautiful sound. Nell stood beside Tahan, the firelight warm on her face, the wind charm in her pocket. He was not a Comanche. She was not a white woman. They were just 2 people, standing by the water, their hands clasped, their promise held fast. They were the bridge. The wedding was not a day. It was an afternoon. It was not an event. It was a promise made in 2 languages. They stood by the Dry Fork, on the bank where the first Thanksgiving had been held. The water, now clear and steady, was the only witness that mattered. Tahan's mother,
Her face as impassive and knowing as the land itself, stood on one side. She held a small, uncut piece of turquoise, bright blue, tied with a simple leather thong. She did not give it to Nell. She gave it to Tahan. He took it, and he tied it, with his own hands, around Nell's wrist. It was not a ring of ownership. It was a piece of the earth, a promise of sky and water. Isaiah, his massive hands cleaned of forged soot, stood on the other side. He held a ring. It was not gold or silver. It was dark iron, hammered from a piece of a broken rifle. The metal of war, of Brant's world, that Isaiah had melted and reformed. He had hammered it into a simple, perfect circle, a promise of labor and strength. He gave this to Nell. She took it, and she slid it onto Tahan's finger. Pastor Hale, his Bible open, watched this exchange. He had never seen anything like it. He looked at Tahan's mother, and she looked at him. He closed his Bible, a small smile on his face. He understood. "The vow," Nell said, her voice quiet, her eyes on Tahan, "is to keep the water." "And to keep each other," Tahan answered, his hand closing over the iron ring. Pastor Hale stepped forward. "In the eyes of God," he said, his voice firm, "and in the eyes of this land, you are one." The new life had begun. May Collins did not stay in her small, damaged shop. The co-op, with its new small profits from the first harvest, bought her a wagon. Isaiah reinforced the axles. Nell lined the inside with shelves. May created the first mobile apothecary and clinic in the territory. She drove it herself. On Mondays and Wednesdays, she was in Red Bluff. On Tuesdays and Fridays, she was at the Comanche camp, which was no longer a hidden, angry place, but a settled community by the river. She treated coughs, set bones, and delivered babies. She brought her steel spectacles and her carbolic acid, and she listened. She learned. From Tahan's mother, the uses of willow bark and the poultice of the yucca. She became, like Tahan, a bridge. The school was held in the new church, but it was not just the school teacher's domain. The children, Comanche and white, sat together. In the morning, the teacher, Miss Albright, taught them their letters from a Webster's speller. They learned to read, to write, to do sums. In the afternoon, one of the Comanche elders, the one who had spoken in the courthouse, would come. He would not sit at a desk. He would take the children to the riverbank, and he would teach them to read the stone. He taught them the signs for water, for buffalo, for danger, for peace. They learned the language of the petroglyphs. They were learning, together, how to read the world in two languages so that no one could ever lie to them again. Nell was not a widow. She was not the station manager. She found, simply Nell. Her sight had healed, the scar a pale, thin line. By the time the first snows dusted the top of the Mesa Chaco, she knew she was pregnant. It was a quiet, certain knowledge. She told Tahan not with words, but by taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. His reaction was not a smile or a shout. He simply, for a long, still moment, closed his eyes, his hand resting on her, a profound, silent gravity. He was not being tied. He was taking root. He began to build their home. He did not build a log cabin, a box to hide from the wind. He did not build a teepee, a home meant to move. He chose a spot on a low rise, looking out over the dry fork, where he could see the water and the mesa in one gaze. He used wood, a strong frame, like the white builders, but he built it in a circle, like the lodges of the people. It was open, with a high roof and a single central fire pit. It was a home that was anchored, but it was a home that could breathe. It was a compromise. It was a home for a new world. One evening, as the walls were rising, they stood inside the skeleton of their future. The air was cold, and the first stars were sharp in the purple sky. Nell was holding her mother's locket. Tahan was holding the wind charm his mother had given her. He had hung a single, strong peg of wood by the door, a place of honor. Nell stepped forward and hung the tarnished silver locket from it, the locket that was a map, a memory, a key. Tahan stepped beside her. He hung the juniper wood charm, with its single hawk feather, on the same peg. The locket and the charm clicked together, a tiny, metallic, woody sound. They hung, side by side, catching the last of the light, the memory of her mother, and the memory of his people. They were not fighting. They were friends. "It is a good home," she said, her voice low. He put his arm around her, his hand resting on her side, on the child, on the scar. "It is a strong home," he said. "The vow," he said, not to her, but to the land, to the house, to the future. "No one will ever own the water." "And the truth," she answered, leaning her head against his shoulder. "And the work of our hands, that will be the law." The sun rose. It had been 6 months. The winter was over, and the spring was a riot of green, a color the valley had not seen in a decade. The small, terraced dams, all 20 of them, were full, the water not rushing but seeping, feeding the land. Nell and Tahan rode out from their new home. The lodge was finished, a wisp of smoke rising from its center. Nell was heavier, her body full with the new life. She rode her mare with the same easy, balanced grace. Tahan rode beside her, his gaze sweeping the plains, no longer a scout looking for enemies, but a guardian watching his world. They rode parallel. They did not ride one in front of the other. They rode side by side, matching pace, moving as one. They paused on the ridge, the same ridge where he had first watched her. They looked down at the valley. It was not a parched, red, angry place. It was a community. They could see the church and the smithy and the wagons of the farmers. They could see the small, orderly lodges of the Comanche camp. And they could hear it. It was a sound that carried on the clean morning air. It was not the roar of a flood. It was the quiet, constant, steady sound of the water, moving through the new, small, community dams. It was the sound of 100 small streams, murmuring, laughing, working. It was the sound of a promise kept. Freedom was not being alone, high on a ridge. It was not a locked room, counting beans. Freedom, they had learned, was the hard, daily, beautiful choice to be tied to the land and to each other. It was not a promise made once. It was a promise made every day, every morning, with the rising of the sun. Tahan looked at Nell, her face warm in the new light. She looked at him, and together they rode down into the valley, their 2 horses leaving a single, shared trail in the rich, dark, and living earth. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please share your thoughts and where you are listening from in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to our channel, Wild West Tales. Like this video, and give it a huge boost by hitting that hype button. It helps get these stories out to more listeners, just like you.